And the recording is taking a while to kick off. Not seeing a red button yet.
We see the red button.
There we go. Welcome everybody to the Podman Community Cabal meeting. Today is Thursday, January 20th, 2022. We've got a number of topics to talk about today, including volume storage on a Mac, a new network rollout, Podman 4.0 rollout, and a new topic in from Navid, welcome, for the Podman TUI. And let's see, I will add a link to the agenda. I'll be taking notes in the agenda there today as we go along. Come on. If you see anything that I missed right or you want to add to it, please feel free to go ahead and do so. And then I will post this later this afternoon, hopefully, or tomorrow for later review. And given all that, I'm going to hand it over to Brent and Ashley for volume storage on a Mac. Go ahead, folks.
Okay. I'm at a loss for remembering why this is on the agenda, to be honest. Does anyone recall?
I asked to have it on because I still.
Oh, that's why I missed it then.
I don't think we've come to a firm conclusion on how we're going to do this. So we've had some internal meetings to talk about it. Why don't we just talk about, and especially with Anders here, who's probably done the most work on this.
All right, now I know what Dan was up to. So we've been contemplating how to do volumes, as Dan said, with a Mac, for example, where they're really applicable on any platform where the Podman client and the Podman server are on different nodes. And as we understand it, on the Mac version, if you do a Podman run and do a -v bind mount of something, they have a way of bind mounting that particular directory reference into the VM. So when the VM runs it, everything works hunky-dory. They have a distinct advantage, although I haven't really crawled through the code. They have the distinct advantage there with running daemon, in the sense that managing that volume connection once it's been made is required. In other words, how do you know to unmount if the container finishes? So you run a container that has a bind mount. If the job is finished, the container closes, then that bind mount should be closed as well, or unmounted any which ways. And then there's a problematic conversation between the initiator of the mount. So does the client mount to the VM, or does the VM mount by touching the client? And if so, what are the ramifications of that? And these were the primary topics that we were kicking around, trying to wrap our head around. And like Dan said, it's good that Anders is here, because I think he's seen the source code everywhere, perhaps, where I tend to avoid looking at it. So we're curious if people have opinions or stronger opinions on how this could go theoretically and not become a nightmare of trying to keep track of all these things. The floor is open.
Anders, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, when we compare with the Docker machine implementation and what's currently on the Podman main, then the VM mount is kind of static and totally unrelated to the container mounts. That might be undecided. There might be a desire to have a mapping in the future, but that's not the way it's implemented at the moment. So you basically like mount your home directory or something, and then you use subdirectories of that for container mounting. But the VM mount stays with the entire session, so it doesn't mount and unmount when containers start and stop.
Interesting. So then you just have the job of sort of, on the VM, you have the job of sort of doing the translation between the mount that was provided to you and what it's actually mounted under then?
Yeah, so the easiest translation is to just use the same. Previously, we had some issues when CoreOS didn't allow you to change the root directory, but in the latest releases, you can do temporary mount points even in the root directory. They are ephemeral, but it's just mount points. So that's doable. So you can mount /users now, and it's not an issue.
Okay, so you over mounting the whole user's home directory.
Yeah, you could do that. You get into trouble if you do like from a Linux to a Linux mount. Like if you try to mount /home and create a user with the same name, then you obviously have a conflict. The same if you try to mount /temp, then you have a bunch of systemd files and whatnot in temp. So, but I think the problem is similar to running in like an NFS in corporate environment where you have like multiple home directories and multiple temps and whatnot.
Do you not get in trouble with doing that and, for example, the .ssh directory overriding the one that's actually there?
Like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
in the Podman machine, we run as the user core, so you don't get into trouble unless your username is core on the host. But then you have other issues, I guess.
Okay. Okay. So Dan, what do you think of that? It would be basically managing. We already have the mounting of the home dir. So if we decided not to overlay the whole core user home dir, it would just be a matter of setting, what the root is as far as Podman is concerned on the VM. What the home dir is, for example.
Right, but so how does this work exactly? So I'm going into the SSH directory inside of the Podman machine, and that's logging in as core. And now I'm mounting home /dwall / foobar directory.
Yeah, I mean, you have the whole permissions thing, and
right. I'm going to end up with user namespace. It's going to make user namespace to be screaming like crazy at that point, right?
Yeah. It also depends on how you do the mount.
From an SE Linux point of view, we're going to have to deal with basically. I'm not sure what the label of an SSHFS file system is at that point, so we'd at least have to allow that. Then we have user namespace that we have to get around to make this work as well.
Yeah. So I mean, it's your basic remote file system,
right?
And then you get people running ahead of themselves and saying that like I notify events from the host to the VM doesn't work and so on. But I think that's the least of your problem.
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, we're going to hopefully get to the point where we do reverse SSHFS, which will theoretically can come back out of the VM and ask to set up a mount, right? So that my understanding of it.
Yeah.
But if we can get off the ground with just saying we're going to take the entire home directory mounted inside of the VM, and then we can work around the SE Linux and user namespace issues.
Do we have all those issues if we do it if we were, for example, to mount to home core, Mac, and we mounted to that and then did the interpolation there?
You're going to have
same problem.
You're going to have the same problem no matter what, because the UIDs and GIDs are not going to match up correctly, so they're going to be treated as the core user is not allowed to access Brent Bowden's UID, and then same thing with SE Linux is probably a little easier because we could just figure out what the hell the label is of the SSHFS and just say, you know, inside a Podman machine, we have a special SE Linux Boolean that just turns on, you know, allowing people to access their home directory content. But I think let's get the thing up and running, and then we can figure these out. So
let's do that.
I like the idea of just getting that out the door, so we at least have some kind of volume support, because that's our biggest weakness. We don't have the volume support.
So Anders, with that, then you'd also have to. It seems to me you would also have to check to make sure that the volume provided is not out of the context of the home dir then as well.
So right now there is no like hard-coded route or anything, so you can mount whatever you want, and we started with 0 mounts, so there are no mounts by default. I think Docker has like 4 mounts or something by default.
Okay.
But since we didn't have a design discussion or a consensus on it, so it starts out empty, and then the user can opt into mounting anything basically, but you will run into issues if you try to mount something that already exists, and because you will shadow whatever is in the VM and so on. But if you set up, and obviously anything under /MNT is up for grabs, so that is safe. /GMT and /home are kind of complicated on their own. So.
Right. So, I mean, to me, the first version, we just say we just support mounting from your home directory. We don't support from any other directory on the Mac.
Yeah, we can work around this. So I'm Dan, I think we got something here. And as far as security issues, you and I can.
Yeah, we'll deal with those.
We'll work that out. So thank you very much.
Yep.
And back to you, Tom.
Yeah, just real quickly, Brent, I got distracted by some people trying to get in and getting denied and so forth. If you could add, I put in, we need to chase down further thoughts are, if you could add anything else that I missed there, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Got it written down.
Okay. Yep. Put it down there too, be good for future reference for folks.
Yeah. Swap it out to HackMD later.
Yep. Or Anders, if you want to go ahead and drop into HackMD, that'd be good too.
No, I think just a couple of links would be enough for now.
Yes, that'd be good as well. All right, so next up we have new network rollout from Paul and Matt. I'm not sure who's taking that.
I can.
Is Matt
Sure,
here?
go ahead.
Okay.
Okay.
So for those that have been paying very close attention on IRC, you've seen a lot of chatter amongst probably 4 or 5 of us about things called Netavark and things called Aardvark and references to a new network. And we have talked about it fairly openly in Cabals or otherwise. And what's going on, just to sort of review, is for Podman 4.0, we intend to introduce a new network stack that would replace the container network, the CNI plugins. And we have, I'm not going to go too deeply into why, but one of the main reasons is that CNI, particularly in domain name resolution amongst containers and more complex networks, was not able to do the use cases people were finding to be common. And it was just really a limitation of the plugins themselves. And so we rewrote a stack with all this in mind, trying to do everything that CNI does, plus what we knew we needed, and sort of open up things a little bit more. And that particular stack is called Netavark. And rather than being a series of plugins, it's a single executable written in Rust. And Podman behaves more or less the same as it did before, So there won't be an outwardly noticeable difference to any users. Podman sends it a config for network, and it goes and sets up all the interfaces and does the IP assignment and returns. There's now we have that. It works. It's working quite well. We have pretty much parity with CNI in terms of just standard networking, but not everything. One thing we're missing is DHCP on Mac VLAN as of now, and that's something we're discussing on how to really do that correctly. So the initial release may be a little funky on that till we get it nailed down. Our IPv6 is already better than what we had before, so we're pleased by that. And it's faster, which we're pleased by. And there's certainly more room to make it faster as well. Now we have then this DNS resolution stuff that we're going to implement, and that's called Aardvark DNS, which we usually just refer to as Aardvark. And that basically replaces the stack of DNS mask and DNS name that got launched out of CNI, but we're still following the same model. So if net name resolution, if the subnet or the network that you're running your containers on has DNS enabled, Podman will send all that to Network. Network will communicate with Aardvark to make sure that name resolution works, and then off it goes. And rather than use DNS mask, we took the components of a popular Rust implementation and then modified it for our purposes. And that one right now we're heavily in development of and trying to get that all working. But it will cover these use cases that several people have been, not several people, a lot of people have been wishing they could do here because they can do it on Docker. And that's coming all to fruition as we speak. With this comes a couple of changes to default, and so we want to set expectations. If you're running a Podman 3.x and you upgrade to 4, we will not alter your network. It will continue to be CNI. We place a little marker in the file system so that we know, and we do not change your networking stack. If this is a 4.0, it's a 4.0 and no storage. You've never run a container on it. In other words, that all that part is empty. Then it will default to Network. That is alterable by a containers.conf entry where you could, if you just want to use CNI, you could stay there. And people very, very well may have a reason to, if they've developed a custom plugin or something along those lines. So that's how the network partitions are going to work in terms of its defaults. The second default that's being changed is we have not enabled DNS resolution on the default Podman networks, and we intend to do so for Network. So that will be a behavior difference from Docker. And so just to repeat, the network that if you just run a container with Podman 4.0 and the Network, you will get name resolution on the default network. So those are the two big defaults I can think of that are changing. Matt and Paul and Adi, anything that you guys would like to add in terms of, hey, this is what it is and how it works, and these are the things that are changing?
Well, one thing maybe we intend to replace the bridge and McVLAN functionality from CNI right now. So if you use any other plugins like custom ones or some from Kubernetes or whatever, we don't support this with NetArk and never will be probably. So that's a reason for you to stay on CNI. If you just use networks which you create with Podman Network Create, you should not notice a difference, and you can use NetArk just fine.
And
Oh.
one thing, okay, someone has a question.
If I may ask the question, so what you said makes sense and clearly provides a lot of value. I wonder from a packager's perspective, when I'm preparing the Podman packages from a distribution and I'm providing now Podman 4.0 packages, are there any, so what are the considerations you would like us as packagers to take into account? Any special transition steps or notifications or links or documentation do you think would be helpful to users?
Yes, I think at present, we tried to implement the network stacks so that packagers wouldn't have to take any sort of action or run a script thereafter. Those, however, sound ripe for an oh shit, we forgot something. And so stay tuned.
Yeah.
But
I think
but
would say
Paul
that-
wrote that.
yeah, there will be requirements though. I mean, we're gonna have to package up NetArk and Aardvark.
Yeah, but beyond that, they shouldn't have to run a migration script or anything along those lines. The one change that you will have to make, Rainer, for certain is, well, let me double check that. Paul, will we explicitly change the back end in the containers.conf for 4.0? Or is it just if it's not said what it is, it'll be, and there's no storage, it'll be 4.0.
If it's not set, it will. If it's not set, it will like first it will check like the storage. It will check if you have CNI networks, then it will use CNI. Or if NetArk is not installed, it will also fall back to CNI. So.
Okay. So there is not by default, there's not an explicit setting in containers.conf. We did away with that.
There is an explicit setting, but this does not need to be set by default. By default, it's set to the empty string, and that lets us auto detect.
Yeah. So just like before. So I am mistaken in the sense that you do not need to alter that. I know for a while we were thinking that packagers would have to change that file.
I will just note that there are other considerations around the 4.0 migration, in that we have some database schema changes that are somewhat breaking, and we do not recommend you downgrade from 4.0 back to 3.0. It will still work, but some network configuration will be wiped. For example, if you have a container that you migrated to 4.0 and then you try to run it with Podman 3.0, it will not have static IPs, it will not have ports forwarded. I think there may be some other ones, but those are the big ones that I can recall.
Matt, can you remind me, you just said a configuration database. What is this database? I'm not sure if I'm familiar with that.
It's internal to Podman. It's not packaged. So if you run Podman, we have a BoltDB database. It's similar to the Berkeley database, but it's used for storing internal container configuration. We had a schema change from 3.0 to 4.0 to better support the new network stuff. And this is a silent migration, but once the migration is completed, Podman 3.0 will no longer be able to read some of the network information.
And is that database persisted, like in the home directory or somewhere?
Yes. For rootless Podman, it's in the home directory. For non-root Podman, it is somewhere in var
lib container storage.
I think that is worth a note in README Debian or some packager's note around the requirement of not downgrading that.
Yeah.
The only suggestion that I have, please make it part of the release notes, and I think that's fine.
Yes.
Oh, release notes are going to be massive for 4.0. So
Yeah. Matt spent all day yesterday. Did you even scratch the surface, Matt?
I am into December. I'm about halfway through December. So we got about a month and a half more commits. But yeah, I will definitely include this in the release notes, Reinhardt.
Yeah, and if possible, Matt, I think this one should probably be front and center up at the top. Because I
Yeah,
can just see somebody moving a container from 4 environment to 3 environment and yelling.
I actually think the other problems of 4.0, which we're going to cover in a minute, are critical out as well. The API changes.
So
Yes.
maybe to give you a little more flavor of the Debian perspective. So in Debian, we have like this apt list changes thing that when you're upgrading will display to the administrator, look, these are the things that have changed in the package and these are the things that you should know. I don't think if you have a really lengthy release notes that it makes sense to paste like this big wall of text into that. But
Right.
I'd like to add the things that are really relevant to the packages, like to the local administrator users that install it on the laptops of, if you upgrade that, please don't downgrade and stuff like that. So pointing that out in this forum is definitely helpful for me to know, okay, these are the kind of things to put in that text.
We'll keep that in mind, and we'll see how we can help you. Is Lokesh on? Lokesh, did you bump into any other things that might be worth mentioning to Reinhardt?
As far as the copper packaging goes, nothing so far. But yeah, the official Fedora packaging is in progress, and I'm checking with people in the packaging committee about some exceptions for packaging. So, but as far as end users go, I don't see any issues.
Now, Reinhard, are you using the make files to build your packaging, or are you doing?
I'm not.
Okay,
No, we are not.
So there is a sub ID build tag that's been added. So you probably want to turn that on. So that's going to allow Podman to get Etsy sub UID and Etsy sub GID via the network, basically from LDAP servers. But it's turned on. It's only enabled if you have the latest Shadow Utils package installed. So I don't know what if Debian has the latest Shadow Utils, then
you need lib sub UID.
Yeah, lib sub UID is the.
Okay. That's helpful to know. Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah. So the Debian package does not use the make files. The Debian is using a helper script that is basically copying all the sources into a staging directory and is symlinking everything that is vendored to a distribution provided stuff. And it's a rather fragile and elaborated setup. And actually, I ran into problems because there is this utility called Podman Remote that I still haven't figured out how to actually build it manually. The makefile does it with overwriting stuff, and I still need to do some research in that. But thank you a lot. Yeah.
I don't think Podman Remote should be shipped with for Debian. I don't even know if we ship it in Fedora at this point.
We do.
We do.
Yeah, Podman has a -- remote option, and as of 4.0, you can set your containers.conf to make your Podman always default to remote, and that will give you the equivalent of the Podman -remote command. It doesn't make sense to have a Podman and a Podman -remote executable on disk, since Podman can do remote behavior as well as local behavior.
Thank you, Dan. That was very helpful. I have a request for adding this Podman remote boundary. I'm more than happy to just close it with no.
Yeah, just tell them to use the -remote option. Yeah.
We have a lot of documentation that needs to be changed from Podman -remote to Podman -remote or Podman with remote in config or whatever. So it's because it's currently versioned. So if you're on Mac, you run Podman. If you're on Windows, you run Podman. If you're on Linux, you run Podman remote.
Right.
And then you get the same experience.
So just if you put a space between the Podman and the -remote, then you'll get it. Yeah. So
a space and a dash, but
a dash.
There's some setting to do in some Markdown and other files.
I want to get back to Adi. I know he was trying to make a remark when the question was asked. Adi?
I just forgot about it. It was mostly related to migration stuff. And there's one more thing in DNS that Docker does not supports like cross resolution of networks, like if container is attached to multiple networks. So we are going to be supporting that with the new stack, and bunch of minor features, and which is like where Docker is working around stuff. So we'll try to cover up those edge cases in the new DNS setup.
I don't think we really went over the benefits of the new stack, but I'm writing the release notes for the network stuff right now, and we have extensive changes and additions to the network stack configuration options. We now support static v6 addresses, didn't do that before. We now support per network configuration. So if you have a container that you create that joins 2 to 3 different networks, you can set static IP, static IPv6, network aliases, and even interface name on a per network basis for all of those. Previously, you could only set a static IP if you joined a single network. This also applies to Podman Network Connect, Network Disconnect. You connect to a new network, you can specify static IP, static MAC address, etc. And v6 compatibility has seen massive improvements. We mentioned static v6 addresses before, but I think we're getting to a point where we will actually have meaningful v6 support without requiring routable subnets via, IPv6 NAT, which is, you can debate whether IPv6 NAT is a good idea all you want, but this lets us actually ship default network configurations that include IPv6, which is a big win from our eyes. And IPv6 port forwarding as well. That has never worked. It's going to work now.
Okay, want to wrap up the discussions on the network changes for Podman 4 just due to the time that we've got. We've got about 25 minutes left and at least 2 more topics. And Matt, do you want to say?
Tom, let me, one final comment. For those that are interested in this network, we really need people to beat up this stuff a little bit. So if you are interested, reach out to us somehow anyway. We'll make a document on how you can run this, and you guys can begin to exercise it and let us know if we're missing common use cases or use cases that are important to you.
Just please avoid doing it with RC1. I'm about to cut release candidate 2, which will support it. RC1 still had builda stuck on a CNI, and you don't want to run CNI and NetArc at the same time. We can run all over each other. So running, RC2 should work just fine.
All right, Matt, do you want to kick us off then with the 4.0 rollup? Anything further on 4.0?
Well, the big things are going to be the database migration and the network changes. There are also a variety of breaking API changes. I think Dan has some things to say about those. Otherwise, I have a bevy of very small breaking changes to the output of Podman inspect, to the behavior of Podman -- remote, but none of them are particularly big. The big ones are breaking API changes and the API migration.
Yeah, so a lot of our original API, most of them are, there are a lot of minor changes, but theoretically they could break your existing scripts if you're using Podman remote. I think the far more interesting thing is the rollout of how we're going to do this on a Mac and potentially on a Windows machine. One of the key factors in Podman on a Mac is that we have to have Podman 4 has to work. Client has to work with Podman 4 server. Any 3 won't work with 4, and 4 won't work with 3. And because of that, we have to coordinate. We're trying to coordinate as best as possible with the Fedora CoreOS team to get Podman 4 out quickly. Now, we also have, in Fedora world, we're not allowed to ship a breaking change, or as a good citizen of Fedora world, we're not during a release. So Podman 4 will not show up automatically until Fedora 36, which is coming out in, I think, May. So if you want to run Podman on Fedora 35, the packages will be available, but they won't, just doing a yum update won't get you the Podman 4.0 release. But that's something you have to understand, is that we don't have right now, we don't have backwards compatibility or forwards compatibility between the Podman remote and Podman server, which is going to cause issues on a Mac. For CoreOS, we're going to be moving to the Devel branch of Fedora CoreOS, so that it'll be Fedora. Basically, it'll be under the covers will be Fedora 35, but with Podman 4.0 on it. So we're going to try to coordinate that as close as possible, but that might be a rocky rollout, just because we have lack of control on when Podman shows up in Brew for our Mac, as well as lack of control of when Fedora CoreOS will cut a release. So we're trying to cut down that window as much as possible, so people don't have a bad experience right out of the box. Any other questions about Podman 4? Matt, how many pull requests went into Podman 4.0 versus the last version of 3? Do you have a number for that?
Give me a sec.
It's enormous. So basically, we haven't really released a release of Podman for 4 months now. Or 3, I guess, since
I don't have a pull request number, but it is 459 commits, which is very large relative to a typical release. I think we're about twice as large as 3.4 was.
So as we get the release candidates out, bottom line is there's a lot of changes here. We'd like to get as many adventuresome people to try it out earlier, so that we can get things fixed before we go to final release.
Maybe to add here, also interesting for Reinhard, that we now have a new binary for the rootless port forwarding. So previously this was integrated into Podman, but now it's a separate binary to improve the performance, basically. So that's something you have to build there as well.
Yeah, and just as a note for the folks who are testing, please test before February 21st, because that's what we're targeting for final release.
Hopefully a little earlier than that. Hopefully a little earlier than that. Let me think. I just want to also make one shout out to Ed Santiago and Chris Evich, who are not going to be in the release notes because none of their changes were user facing, but have done massive amounts of work on our CI and testing infrastructure. So props to them.
Okay, anything else there, or any questions about that? All right, then I will turn it over to Navid to talk about Podman TUI, and I hope I didn't butcher your name too badly.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for your time. And I'm just new to Podman, and I started a fun project, which was a terminal user interface for Podman. It's using I'm not sure if everyone can see the screen.
We can now.
Yep. So it's using the bindings, the Podman bindings to communicate. As long as the socket is up, it will automatically load everything. The refresh is based on the events that is receiving, except the memory usage and swap usage, which is basically is just using the system info to see to get the information. It has different views regarding the pods, containers, volumes, images, and networks, and the system events. And most of the commands, I already added some of the commands that was available, and from Podman create, inspect, kill, start, stop. For example, start automatically will start. Create, we can create, and added most of the options. Containers, same thing, we can start, stop, and kill logs, create containers. For example, we can create a new one, select the image that we already pulled, select the pod that we want, labels, the ports that we need, and create. And it will automatically add. Same things for volumes, images, same thing. Some of the commands, it has the image pool, and it can search the for the image and then pull the image.
You have the ability to exec into a container?
Sorry? No, at the moment. It's just first, I mean, sure, I was just playing with the bindings. It started as a just fun project.
When you say bindings, are you talking about the Golang bindings, or are you talking
Yes,
about
Go bindings. Go bindings.
Okay.
Yep, yes.
Very cool.
And also the events, the disk usage info, and other information. And it's just using the standard keyboards like tab to switch between elements, up, down, and standard keys, and F1 to F6.
Well, if you'd like,
Thank you so much.
if you're interested in getting this project into the containers repo, then this would be something we probably would be willing to add.
Yeah, that will be nice, definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.
Just contact me about getting it in, and we'll see if we can set you up.
Yeah,
Sure.
I was going to say, come see me, but
Yeah, I'll go see Brent. Better see Brent.
yeah, and Navid, if you could add some links to the chat, or better yet, into the Hack MD for the project.
Yes, sure.
very, very cool, though. I think the whole Podman team is probably astonished. Yeah, very neat.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the comment.
Yeah, I would say that the one thing I would want would be, if you want to work on something next, would be to basically launch exec into a running container.
Sure.
So that you can, just basically launch a terminal, or just join the terminal to that.
So is this 100% Go?
Yes, it's 100% Go.
So it would run on Mac.
Probably, yes. It's using the T-cell for the user interface, which is again Go, and then using the Podman bindings to get information about the Podman.
We're not hearing you, Valentin.
Sorry?
Valentin, I think, is trying to speak, but we don't hear him.
There is a new project under containers called Podman Desktop, which is a GUI for Macs on management of Podman machine. So if anybody wants to take a look at that, or to open a pull request, or better yes, to test it, contact Ashley, or just open up issues.
It's still in its beginning stages, but we welcome pull requests, and if anybody has experience with like GUI, especially on Macs, on Swift, we could use help, because we're just trying our best right now with it.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. I just wanted to choke if Brett wants to turn the GUI on Mac into a TUI. Just open a terminal and you have the nice interface.
Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't?
I mean, the thing has got like basically everything that we want in Cockpit that's not there.
Yeah, really nice work, David.
We could put a button in the GUI that launches a TUI. Like,
there you go. Perfect.
And just be one big button for the GUI. That'd be
That's
a
right.
GUI.
Can't miss it.
Try icon opening the Mac terminal.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's very nice. Thanks for making that happen, Valentin and Navid both. And now we have time for open discussion and about 10 minutes left in the meeting. So does anybody have anything further they want to discuss? Or different, or suggestions for next meeting? Which is February 17th for the Cabal meeting. And we have a community meeting coming up not too far away. It's the first Tuesday of February. That's the 1st of February, actually.
If I can throw out a request, if it's appropriate.
Sure.
Is my audio okay?
Yep. Perfect.
I just wanted to mention that I've been starting a website at cness.readthedocs.org. And I'm starting to write it as a guide. The motivation was when I started using Podman 2 years ago, I was essentially using it the way one might use Conda, and it initially similar to Flatpak, although I've since just relied on Flatpak for GUI applications. But in general, there was a lot of open questions and I guess unclear approaches to how to use Podman. So I ended up making scripts, and I do have a small tool in there, but I think probably what's more valuable to the community is just the documentation and guides and explaining how to use Podman, because I think a lot of people would prefer just having their own little scripts calling into Podman to do the user scenarios I did. But if people have feedback for the documentation or maybe alternate documentation that I should link to or whatever may be useful for the container usage scenario that I talk about, that I call nest containers for lack of a better term, and any of that feedback would be useful. I just hope that people that are new to containers and Podman kind of realize what tools or what approaches they could take that that may not be clear, since so much of containers is really oriented towards servers and doing things in the background in the server environment, and not kind of a personal setup, which is the workflow that I actually usually use them for. Not always, but usually. So I think it can be very confusing.
So you're talking about you're familiar with Toolbox, right?
Yes. Yeah. Actually, part of it was I looked at Toolbox maybe 2 years ago and decided that I really didn't want to use it. And so I ended up just finding what seemed to me a simpler solution that actually catered to the needs that I wanted, and just felt that I could actually mainly do what I wanted to do just using Builda and Podman. And I just needed a little bit of glue here and there to put it together. I've now packaged that up into a package on CNest, which is a Python package, or it's an RPM for Fedora and Red Hat. Also, Toolbox didn't work on Red Hat, so I have that as a desktop. So it's actually, to me, an open question whether it makes sense that there be some kind of tool like CNest or Toolbox for the kind of scenario that I was addressing, or whether it's more a guide and people just need to kind of spin their own scripts to cover it. So regardless, it does seem valuable to have a resource or guides that describe how you can use Podman, and whether someone uses a CNest package that I put together, use Toolbox, or use something else, that I'm less clear. And I think a lot depends on what people want to do. And there are these different scenarios that I think maybe for newcomers, it's not clear exactly what you're going for. Some people really care about having a GUI application, in which case, well, maybe you be using Flatpak, depending on what application you're going for. If you don't have a Flatpak, well, then maybe you do want to use containers. So that's your only hope for getting some GUI application on Debian to work on your computer that's on Fedora or Red Hat. There are other cases. I'm now starting to get a glimpse that I think some people really like the idea of having their containers sharing everything with the host. So they want a lot of integration. Toolbox kind of takes that approach. Distorbox, it's kind of like, okay, everything on the host and the container should all be basically sharing a ton. Whereas I think other people like myself, actually, no, I kind of by default, I want the container to be highly isolated. I only want to share a couple of things because I kind of want to know what does the container end up doing. I don't want it messing up with my home directory. I actually only want to share a few things in my home directory. So I think depending on what people are going for, there are probably different packages that they want to use or different tools. But I'm hoping that this guide that I'm writing up on cness.readthedocs.org, or maybe someone else has something better than what I've written, can be a source where people can go through and figure out like, okay, which of these various things do I want to use? What approach do I want? What I want to go for? Anyway, that I'm hoping that what I've been figuring out or other people advice people have can get documented.
Yeah, once you have this document, contact us to look at it, because it'd be interesting. Because I think any type of information about how different ways of using, especially rootless containers, is helpful for people to understand these concepts. So
yeah, when I saw rootless, Podman could do rootless containers, I was so thrilled, because I was sick of using Docker, and it just didn't really do this kind of, really in some ways just conda environments or virtual env environments on steroids. So what really was exciting for me is to be able to do something akin to virtual Python environments or conda environments, but just at the container level, and rootless was great when that came out. Thank you.
Sounds great.
I'm still typing away. Yeah, Castello, if you have anything that you want to share with us as far as links to the documents or anything at this point, feel free. Or if you want to tie stuff up and then send us.
Yeah, I think mainly I can, let me type it into it's.
Yeah, if you could type into the HackMD or the chat. I heard you say what it was.
Right. Let me. Yeah, I'll do that too.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Sorry, I'm new to the HackMD.
Sounds real good to me. And just be careful about volunteering to help us document, because that's one thing we'll probably take very big advantage of.
Yes.
So with 4.0 coming out, we're hoping to get, hopefully there'll be some blogs and more information, because there is so many features coming out in 4.0 that I think it's something we should start to brag about. And then obviously we'll be starting to work on 4.1 and some of the things people want us to work on, things like Docker Compose 2, which is going to be a pain in the butt. But
you say that like we're going to do it.
I don't think we're going to have a choice.
Is Podman Compose compatible with the Compose spec, and like what people are using V2 for? I know that it was like Podman Compose had a revival and was.
Yeah, Podman Compose. I don't think anybody on this call, unless there's a community member who works on Podman Compose, but I follow all of the issues and communications about Podman Compose, and it seems to be fairly popular. So
yeah, because
I don't know. I can't answer that question, but yeah.
Yeah, because we had like an old Podman Compose that didn't do much, so people didn't use it, and then we had like people using Docker Compose with Podman Sock and complaining about it and missing V2 features. But it seems like Podman Compose actually implemented some of those
so
V2 spec things, even if it's not. I mean, it's not related to Docker Compose V2 or the Go implementation, but it seems to have some of the capabilities. So.
For those that don't know, Podman Compose doesn't use the API. It's actually just execing Podman underneath the covers. So it's translating the compose into actually command line options and then executing it. And Anders and I and others believe that Podman Compose was dead last summer, and then it's just taken off over the last 6 months in popularity. Probably because more people are coming to Podman and then wanting to have compose features. So, and that's what comes up when you say Podman and Compose. It's going to come up as Podman Compose.
So Compose is like 5 or 6 different specifications at this moment. So you roll a dice and then you get.
Right. Anything else that we have before we wrap up? Well, then I'd like to go ahead.
So just a clarification, when Podman 4.0 ships, that means that the packages for like Podman 3 will be deleted from OBS and so on. So then it's like, then we're upgraded. Like if you apt install Podman, you will get Podman 4.
Depending on when the distribution support it, yes.
Yeah, so there's no like maintenance trucks or forking off a Podman 3 somewhere or something.
Well, Podman 3 is supported in the RHEL world, and
Yeah.
so it will be available for a long period if you
Yeah,
want to pay for long-term support, but
not on the
Yeah.
cubic repos, right? For
Cubic.
Ubuntu.
Yeah.
and the same for Debian, I guess. We'll also have like a stable thing.
I think that is worth a conversation. So at this point, I do not plan on making the Podman 3 and Podman 4 package co-installable. That is an option if there
I
was
didn't
strong
mean
demand for that.
co-installable. I meant like if you install an older release, you will still have Podman 3 in circulation in certain long-term support.
Debian stable ships, to the best of my knowledge, with Podman 3.4 or something, and or 3.2. I have to check. And I do not plan on updating that in stable. There has been a request of providing a new Podman in Debian backport. So this is a service that people may choose to opt into their services list. And if that were a thing to happen, which currently is not, but it's a request and we're thinking about doing that, should that happen, then people would have the option of taking them either from backports as well or from the distribution. The same also applies to if you're going to Debian unstable or testing, you will get that version of Podman that currently is in those rolling distributions. The same also for Ubuntu. If you are on Ubuntu Hirsute and you are then going to Ubuntu Jammy, then you will get that version of Podman that is in that distribution channel. So if you want to use a specific version of Podman, you would have to choose the specific distribution that it comes from if you want to use the packages that came from my hand. What you were talking about was something else. So these were the repositories that are maintained on OBS, and I think maintained by the Podman community and Podman upstream. I think someone else should comment on what the support plans for those repositories are.
I think we have discussed it before as well.
Yeah,
I think one thing I would point out is that when we're doing backports for RHEL, we do make the backports public. So there are 3.Podman 3 has I think a RHEL branch, and Matt, back me up on this.
Yeah, it's v3.0.2-RHEL, I want to say. Basically, look at the Podman repo and look for branches that have a -RHEL suffix. I believe the currently active ones are v302-RHEL and v342-RHEL. Those are where we do packaging for RHEL. So any long-term support fixes and etc. will be backported to those repos, or those branches rather.
So we're doing this
So you're not going to be able to use a Podman 4 client with a Podman 3 server, right? So you need to match it at least major versions. Yeah.
Yep. So there is no hidden package. We're not doing any patches inside of we don't intend to do any patches inside of RHEL releases. So if you want to build the equivalent of the RHEL package for some other distribution, then you're welcome to do that as well. And we'll maintain stability and try to make sure everything continues to work.
Yeah, Reinhard, one last question before we wrap up.
Dan, thanks for pointing out the RHEL branches. I was wondering about them. Would you recommend for or against using these RHEL suffix branches for, let's say, the Debian packages?
If you want to have long-term support on older versions, then I would recommend it to use those. Yes.
Thanks.
Because basically, we're blocking major features going back, but anytime there's a bug fix or security fixes and stuff like that, they all show up in that.
Critical bug fixes and security fixes, I should say. We don't backport for just anything, especially 3.0 at this point is basically important CVEs only, or really critical bug fixes. It is long-term support for, I think, 2 years, but it's long-term support in the sense that they didn't get many changes.
Right. So
perfect.
So in the RHEL world right now, in RHEL 8, every even release is supported for 2 years. So whatever goes out in 8.6 will be supported for 2 years. So you'll probably see a branch of whatever goes out in rel 8.6 will get created, and then that, we don't, as I said, we don't backport much into that, but if there is a major bug or a CVE, then that's when they get backported.
Great, folks, we're way past time, but I would like to thank everybody for coming in and joining today and discussing. We had great discussions. Quick reminder, next meeting's February 17th, and y'all have a great day. I'm going to stop the recording now.